Okay, it's 9 a.m, so I'll declare the Council Ordinary Meeting 21st of May open. Pursuant to Section 13 of Council's Local Law Number 2, I'm inviting the Interim Management Committee, being Jan Taylor, Simone Webb, Steve Greenwood and Stan Gallo, to address the Council on any matters before it. I'm bound to declare conflicts of interest and any potential conflicts of interest, and I shall do so, and the members of the IMC are not legally bound to do so, but in accordance with the Interim Management Committee Charter, they will also declare any conflicts of interest and potential conflicts of interest. Thank you. Ipswich City Council respectfully acknowledges the traditional owners as custodian of the land. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging as the keepers of the traditions, cultures and stories of a proud people. I would ask you all to stand for the reading of the prayer, please. Thank you. We meet today to serve our community, to use our resources wisely and well, to represent all members of our community fairly, and to make decisions that promote the common good. Thank you. Agenda item D, apologies and leave of absences, we have nil. Item E, condolences and memorials, none. F, petitions and presentations, none. Agenda item G, confirmation of minutes. This is the confirmation of various council committee meetings. The Economic Development Committee meeting. I'd resolve that report of the 14th of May be received and adopted. And in doing that, I'll make comments about two agenda items. Firstly, the North Ipswich Stadium, which was agenda 3 on that committee. Just to make it clear what the committee and now council have decided. So this is not a decision to spend $10 million on the stadium. This is a decision in principle to set the ball rolling for a potential redevelopment of North Ipswich Stadium. This is based on discussions that I've had and others have had with rugby league and with football, soccer, Coda football, both of which are seeking national standard licence, an NRL licence and an A-League licence. And the discussion has been along the lines of one of the preconditions of a licence apparently is having a stadium of a certain scope. How do you get to the point where you get 2 or 3 levels of governments and private sector to commit to a stadium? So this, pardon the pun, is kicking the ball rolling by saying if a certain number of things happen, then I think Ipswich Council ought to contribute $10 million to that. So the provisos for that expenditure are there needs to be a strategic business case and a concept design that supports the development of the stadium. So both of those are in train but not yet complete. There needs to be a commitment by the state and the Commonwealth governments of at least equivalent funding to the council. There needs to be an agreement from the state that the land transfers to Stadiums Queensland as the custodian of all the major sporting venues in Queensland. And that means that all the subsequent capital and operating costs of that stadium are met by the state. And there needs to be a licence granted to one or both of those codes for that to occur. So all of those things need to happen before the council then would commit $10 million. So it really is our process in getting the ball going and allowing both football and rugby league to go and talk to their national codes and talk to state and Commonwealth governments about securing funding. And the $10 million is our 1/3 of the first stage of a multi-stage redevelopment of the stadium. So that's how that was calculated through a master planning process. So it has been reported in the media as a commitment of $10 million. That's not that. It's a commitment on $10 million if all those things are met. And if all those things are met, we're not building a white elephant because we have 1 or 2 national competitions going here, and the state will then own the stadium, and we're off and running again. Pardon the pun. So I just want to make that clarification formally. And the second comment was really about the planning scheme. And I wanted to formally acknowledge and thank John Adams' work for leading the draft new planning scheme, and that will go on public consultation, informal public consultation next week. So any comments from the committee on those agenda items? No, thank you. The next committee report was Communities Committee report. Growth and infrastructure, sorry. That was the issues I talked about with growth and infrastructure, sorry. So Economic Development Committee resolved on growth and infrastructure. I move that report of the 14th of May also be received and adopted. Communities report, also move that be received and adopted, that report. Environment Committee report, 14th of May, also received and adopted. And make a reference to, we're going to refer some of the matters to the Community Reference Group. So this is the events schedule. So we have an events schedule endorsed by that committee, resolved by Council today for environmental related matters for this year. For next year, we're going to ask the Community Reference Group for environment about their views too. So it's a good example, I think, of how we're starting to use the Community Reference Groups to consider some of the matters around Council. And the last committee meeting to resolve is Governance Committee. So I'd like to make a couple of amendments to the committee minutes, if I can. 2. In item 6, titled Proposed New Trustee Lease over Reserve for Recreation Purposes, Australian Crawl Goodna Proprietary Limited, 19A to Toongarra Road, Leichhardt, deleting the current recommendation and replacing that with the following recommendation: that further analysis of the trustee lease for the Leichhardt pool be undertaken and the outcome submitted to a future committee meeting. And the second amendment I'd like to resolve in item 14, entitled Request for Late Concession and or Exemption for Vedanta Centre of Sydney. Recommendation E be amended by the deletion of the date 5 June 2019 and the insertion of the date 5 June 2015. That's just a correction of a mistake in the date. So with those two amendments, I'll resolve that those committee meetings of the Governance Committee be resolved. I'll make some couple of comments about, actually 4 comments about those matters. The public interest disclosure, I think resolution is a great example again of this council addressing governance concerns and issues, and thank the staff and the members of the IMC involved in that. The gifts, benefits and hospitality policy, for those members of the public who care to read that, that's a very comprehensive policy on the appropriate way for councillors and staff to handle gifts, benefits and hospitality, and I think it's the most comprehensive policy in local government now in Queensland. So again, I thank the staff and IMC members involved in crafting that policy. And the last item I want to comment about is the fees and charges. A substantial amount of work done by council officers to review and update fees and charges, many of which are tied to our costs under the Local Government Act, so it's a cost recovery exercise. So I appreciate the amount of work done there, so thank you. Okay, agenda item I, consideration of notified motions. None. J, reception of notices of motion for future meetings. None. K, questions. None. Agenda item L, officers' reports, of which we have 3 officers' reports today. The first one, provision of insurance brokerage services. Read the report. Any comments from the Interim Management Committee? No? Thank you. So I'll take the recommendations of the report and resolve A, B and C. I won't read them all out, but take those as a resolved. Councillor expenses, reimbursement and administrative support policy. So this is an extensive review of a policy. The most substantive public implications of that is the closure of the 10 existing divisional offices that we publicly announced a few days ago. This is the only council, apart from Brisbane, which has I think about 1 million people and a rate base of that with individual divisional offices. This was the only council that has divisional offices configured in this way, I think, in Queensland. Gold Coast has a range of offices, but they're also customer service centres, so people can go in and pay their rates and do their business at the Gold Coast. So it's a very expensive, we're understanding about $2 million a year, the cost of running these individual offices. Tied with the review of divisional boundaries, and we're yet to know the state government's decision about that, but in principle, multi-councillor division has been supported by the state and are being investigated by the Boundaries Commission. Clearly those 10 are not relevant to the future structure of divisions. But more importantly, I think it's the way that governance needs to be delivered in the city and the way that modern councillors need to work. So with the IT systems, with the integrated customer service centres, we're now talking about having Rosewood, Ipswich and Springfield, and the ability for councillors to meet in any of those offices, future councillors to meet in any of those offices with the public or in people's homes or in their own homes or in coffee shops, etc., and with mobile phones and tablets and connectivity. There is not the need anymore, I think, for dedicated office space per councillor around the city. And as I said, we're the only example of that outside Brisbane that I'm aware of. So the part of the return to elected governance reform agenda of this council during the next 10 months will be equipping those councils with policies and procedures, IT equipment, etc., and arrangements for them to do their business and the proper role of council. So I think that's the most glaring example of the implications of this revised policy. Any comments from Interim Managing Committee? Okay, I'll take those recommendations of the report A to G as resolved. Last officer's report to the meeting is Cameron Park. You might recall that this was considered at one or two council meetings prior to here. Two, I think we've discussed it at. And this is a proposed repeal of the previous recommendations that we dispose of or sell Cameron Park to Sports Club. The report, I think, to council is self-explanatory. Over and above that report, in meeting with representatives of Swifts, it became clear to me that sale of this to Swifts drives Swifts down a certain path, and that path is a significant expansion of the premises with significant increase in the number of poker machines. So I'm not making a comment about the appropriateness of that or otherwise. I actually don't have a view about that. But my key thing was if we drive them, that decision of council would drive them absolutely down that path, and we haven't engaged the community with that. So we do not have a clear view of what the community's expectations and views are about that. So if they were heading down that path, I think it's beholden on certainly Swifts and maybe council as well to actively engage with the community and find out their thoughts before we headed down that path. So I didn't want that decision by council to dispose of that to Swifts to be standing. I think we need to rescind that today and talk to Swifts about the options. There's obligations that council have under the lease agreement to do certain things for the Swifts Club. There's obligations that Swifts have. Both of those need addressing. So I know that the council officers are actively engaged with Swifts to determine the right path, which we don't know what the right path is yet, but the right path at this stage is not to dispose of the land. So unless there's any comments from IMC members, I'll take that resolution and the previous decision of council as per the officer's report adopted at the 29th of January be repealed. Agenda item M. Consideration of items placed on the agenda by councillor. There's nil. And I declare the meeting closed at 9:13 a.m. Thank you all.